So, as she said, some of you may know all this information already, so if you do, just bear with me as I go through it. We're just going to try to lay a foundation for some of you who may not be as familiar with things. And at the end, if you have any questions, you can catch me later, or you can visit the census booth over here, get some information. I'm sure they'll be able to answer your questions also. All right, so the first thing you need to know, April 1st is when Census Day is. We're less than 3 months out, and, oh, you're good. So, sorry. Oh, I didn't see that. Okay, thank you, sir. Oh, it's not showing right. That's okay, but anyway, April 1st is Census Day, and the purpose is to count every single person who lives in the United States and the 5 territories of the United States. And then the goal of it is to count every person once, only once, and in the right place. Because it doesn't matter if we don't count everybody, we don't want them to be counted twice, and what really matters is where are they supposed to be counted. In most cases, that is where they live and sleep most of the time. So we're going to kind of talk about that more as we go along. I don't know which slide. Okay, that one's up there. Okay, so perfect. Sorry, I couldn't tell which one's up there. So why do we even have the census? Everybody knows, right? It's mandated by the Constitution. In Article 1, Section 2, it says that representatives and taxes are apportioned according to their numbers. And the way we get numbers is through the census. Let's see if I can. There we go. And then it had to be made within 3 years. So the very first one happened in 1790. Then, like they've told you, every 10 years it happens. So it's sometimes called the decennial census, but every year that ends in a 0, we have a census. Once that census count is set, it's in place for 10 years. That's why it's so important to us that we want to make sure this one is accurate, because we don't have any time in between to change that. It's just stuck for 10 years. So that's why it's so important. So what is the census data actually used for? You've heard a lot of people talk about it while y'all are just saying why you're here, which is really good. So it determines representation in Congress. Apportionment happens every 10 years. How many seats we get in the House of Representatives happens based on census counts. Okay, and then for voting districts, every 10 years redistricting happens. Like y'all were talking about equal representation, we want that to be happening. So because of that, we want to make sure every person is counted. And then possibly the most important to a lot of you in the room is the allocations of billions of dollars in federal funding. And I will actually talk about numbers. So this number right here, according to a George Washington University study, in fiscal year 2016, Arkansas received almost $10 billion in funding from 55 federal programs that were apportioned based on census counts. So if you look at that number, that's a really big number. It's hard to even wrap my mind around that much money, but that's the money we're talking about comes based on census data. So that's why it's so important that we make sure every single person is counted. Ooh, I don't know what happened here. Okay, just a second, I'm missing a slide, but that's okay. All right, so she just showed a video about how to be counted, right? So in March, you're gonna get an invitation. Most people are gonna get it in the mail. There will be a few people on this slide in the tan color. Somebody will actually leave it at their door, because a lot of these places are more rural and they don't get mail delivered to their actual households, and so people will leave it at their door. But they will get an invitation to respond. This is the first time ever that you've been able to respond online or on the phone, which is a big deal. So now what's important to help people know in your community is you can do it any of those 3 ways. If I don't feel comfortable putting in my information online, then that's fine. I can wait, get a paper questionnaire, and fill it out that way, okay? If I would rather call it in, that's totally fine. Nobody cares how you answer it, they just want you to answer it. That's the main thing, is no matter what avenue you use, please answer it. Online can be on your smartphone. Online can be on your computer at home. Any way you can access the internet with the browser, you can fill out the form. What's important to also know is that online and on the phone are offered this time in 12 non-English languages. And we'll have or I can give you a list of those later or send you a link to that. But anyway, so it's to try to help more people who don't speak English fluently be able to have a way to answer the census. And there's also 59 languages that have glossaries online. So even if they might not have the form in their language, they can give them instructions. So it's very helpful. What they're going to do is in March when they send out that invitation, if you don't respond, they'll send you a reminder. So the Census Bureau understands that you could lose it, that you might misplace it, that things happen and you forget about it. So they're going to try to continuously remind you up until about May. And if you haven't responded any of these 3 ways, then people will come to your house and knock on your door and try to get your census count. Okay, so that's how households are counted. I know some of you talked about these groups earlier too, but there are other groups with special processes. So college students are some of the most confusing to people. Where do they get counted? Well, like I told you, it's where you live and sleep most of the time. So unless the college student lives with their parents and commutes to their college, then most of the time they're actually counted in their college town where they live. If they live off campus, then they're counted the same way you and I are. They will get a form at their house to ask them to participate. But if they're actually in a dorm or on campus, they will be in something called group quarters enumeration, which is a word that we don't use very often, so you may not be familiar with that. But group quarters include college campuses, they include correctional facilities, they include nursing homes, and military barracks. And what happens with these is that the Census Bureau will actually reach out to the administrators of these facilities and set up times to count them, or they will, for such as nursing facilities where the patients probably cannot fill out their own form, they'll get administrative records from them to count all those people. So those will all be counted a special way. Service members who are temporarily deployed abroad will be counted back in their usual place of residence in the United States. And then people experiencing homelessness and people living in shelters are another group that the Census Bureau really is devoting a lot of effort to, 3 days to try to count them. So on March 30th, they'll count people who are in shelters. On March 31st, they'll count people who are in, coming to food pantry, whatever, I can't think of the word now. Sorry. Okay. Mobile food vans or soup kitchens, that's what I'm trying to say. And then on the last day, they'll go to where they know that the homeless gather, right? So if they know that there's a lot of people who have a tent encampment here, they know a lot of people gather under this bridge, they will go to these places. So it's important for the Census Bureau to know about those locations. And if you and your communities know about places like that, you can help inform them of these are places you might want to go to on that day, because it's so important to get those people counted. So the questions that are actually on the 2020 census. There's not that many, they're not hard, so hopefully you can convey that to people. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward to fill this out. The first thing it's going to ask you is a number of people living in your home on April 1st. If you fill it out in March, it's still going to reference April 1st. If you fill it out in May, you're still going to reference April 1st because that is actual census day. So that's important to understand. Then it's going to ask you about each person in your house. What is their sex? What is their age? What is their race? What is their ethnicity when it comes to Hispanic, Latino, or Spanish origin? And then it's going to ask what is their relationship to the central person. So if I fill it out as the householder, then everybody in my household will say, how is that person related back to me? That's to help get information on family versus non-family households, single parent families, that kind of information. Then it'll ask if your home is owned or rented. And then they'll ask some operational questions. So those are mostly to try to capture whether everyone has been counted correctly. So they'll ask you something such as, is there any person who is staying in your home on April 1st that you didn't include in your count? And then if you say, yes, I had a visitor spending the weekend here or whatever, then they'll know that person wasn't supposed to be counted at your house and it's all good. But if they think maybe they needed to be counted, then they may call you. They will ask for your phone number and they may call you and try to settle that and figure out what was going on there. So those are all the questions, nothing hard, no income, no anything like that, so nothing too invasive. Once you answer it, your information is kept confidential. All Census Bureau employees take an oath that they will not reveal your information for life, okay? So they're not allowed to do it. They take it very seriously, and when they release the data, they'll actually release like my household combined with my neighborhood or with my city. So they'll never be able to pick out just my house or just me from the data. They protect it in that way too. But after 72 years, it is released to the public for genealogical purposes, so that will be the only time that your personal data will be released. So the latest was 1940 data was released in 2012, but it's 72 years before that happens. So a 1% undercount in Arkansas, what would that look like? Now this formula at the bottom is based on that study I quoted earlier from George Washington University, which approximate about $3,300 per capita is what we would lose. And if you look at our population estimate is roughly 3 million, so you're looking at 30,000 people. Multiply that out over 10 years and you get $990 million. So a 1% undercount doesn't sound like that much, but it still would make a really big impact on our state. The Census Bureau has done a study to try to determine how many people are going to fill out the census and why they may or may not be doing it, what motivates them, what is a barrier. And if you look on this chart, 68% of the total population said they will be very likely or extremely likely to fill out the census. We know from other forms, other surveys, people are just less likely to fill them out these days. That's just the way it's going, the trend is. But if you look at that 18 to 34 age group, only a little over half, so only 54% of them are either going to be very likely or extremely likely to fill it out, which is a concerning thing to us. So we want to make sure that everybody understands how important this census is. Things that people have said that are barriers why they might not fill it out because they're worried about data confidentiality. So it's important to help people understand that their data is protected, that Title 13 protects their data, that it will not be released individually. Nobody can find out who they are, where they live, any of that kind of stuff from the census. Also, people don't understand, why does it matter to me? What am I getting out of it? What benefit is it if I fill it out? So like some of you were talking about, if you can explain to your community, roads, hospitals, schools, almost everyone will feel that. If they have children, they'll understand, or grandchildren. My schools are important because of them. So if you can make it relate to them, why it could be important to them, then they're more likely to fill it out. So what we're focused on here is the hard to count people, or the historically undercounted people. The Census Bureau, in order to determine if they're hard to count, places them in one of these 4 groups. Or you can be in all 4. As long as you're in one, you're in the hard to count population. It can be hard to locate. So that would include people like that want to remain hidden. They don't want to be located. So that would be like undocumented immigrants. Maybe they don't want anybody to know that they live there. Those kind of people are hard to count. It can, hard to contact could be people such as those who are in gated communities. So if a census taker is going out and they can't get into a gated community, that could be hard. Could be people who are homeless. They're hard to contact because you don't necessarily know where they're going to sleep every night. Hard to persuade people. So that may be people who have low levels of civic engagement and just honestly don't care what it means to do that. Those people are going to be hard to count. And then hard to interview will include people in this census possibly who don't have good internet access. If they're unaware that there are other ways that they can fill out the census, then they may think, oh, well, I don't have internet, I can't do it. Well, we want people to understand that you can still do it. This can include people who have low literacy. So if they can't read the form or that they don't understand it, then they may not fill it out. So those are all people that we're going to focus on and try to make sure that they get counted. So the last thing I'm going to show you is just some of these historically undercounted populations, just to throw out some ideas. You and your community, you know who's in your community, you know which ones of these groups fit into your community, and you probably would have a better way of reaching them than we will, okay? So that's why it's important for you and your community to try to reach these people. So racial and ethnic minorities, as we've already talked about, they have historically been hard to count. Persons who do not speak English fluently, that's why it's important for people to understand, hey, maybe I speak a language that I can call in and they're going to speak in my own language and I can understand, it'll be a lot easier. People who are lower income, they may have multiple jobs and not have time to worry about the census. If you can explain to them how it's important or that it doesn't take very long, you might be able to convince them to do it. Homeless persons, like I said, it's important for the Census Bureau to know if you know areas in your city or your county where homeless persons may congregate, it's helpful for them to know that. Undocumented immigrants, that's one that's very hard, but if we can convince them how confidential the data is, then maybe we can get them to respond. People who are highly mobile, if you're not living in the same place, you're moving around a lot, you're going to be hard to count. So we want to make sure everybody knows wherever you were on April 1st, if that's where you live and sleep most of the time, please be counted there. Children. Children are some of the most undercounted people, especially in the group 0 to 5. And so we want to make sure that we reach out to them. Some of it is due to complex living arrangements, so they're with one parent for a part of the week or maybe every other week and nobody knows where to count them. The Census Bureau does have a frequently asked questions section that actually will go into detail about where you should be counted, so that's helpful. But if we can help them understand, please count your children, okay? Everyone in your household should be counted. So that also kind of applies to who don't live in traditional housing. Maybe it's a multi-generational family. It doesn't matter if you have a baby and a person who's 100, they all are counted, you know. It's the whole family unit that's in, or even non-family that's in the household. And then a big one, right now in the political climate, persons who are angry at or distrust the government. There are some people we know, personally probably, who just don't want anything to do with it has anything to do with the government. So if there's any way we can convince them that maybe they really need a new road, I don't know, something, or hospital, but that's why it's important, not that it has to do with the government. So these are the ones we want to try to reach out to. With your help in your communities, we would like to try to make this census as accurate as possible and the best one that we've ever conducted. So, thank you.
So a couple of things I want to mention. Alison is available for questions, as are folks from the Census Bureau who are here. We're going to take a break in a moment.